I'd just like to welcome you all to this lecture with Dr. Rizwan Salim, who's been very kind to join us this evening to share with us some of his thoughts regarding the current discussions regarding COVID-19. I mean, we're very lucky to have Dr. Rizwan with us, who's both a medical doctor and a trained scholar of the Islamic sciences. For those who don't know him, he been very prominent in what we would describe as a traditional Islamic scene in the UK. He was quite instrumental and a pioneer in helping nurture the scene back in the late 1990s and more specifically the beginning 2000s all the way to the mid 2000s. So for those who remember the light study programs at Hamzullah Mosque, Dr. Rizwan, along with his colleagues, a number of colleagues and helpers, were instrumental in organizing those events, which were at that time pretty much the only events that we used to have in the UK in the traditional Islamic scene, and we would have people coming from all over the country on the weekends for the light study programs. So alhamdulillah, we're very grateful for him joining us, and because of his hard work originally during all those years and providing a platform for a number of different shuyukh actually into the UK. It's very, very important that we take benefit from him. He's still teaching. He's been teaching for over 10 years now, actually, sorry, 15 years since he came back from Syria in 2005-06, I believe. So he's been teaching for about 15 years now for those attending these classes. And one of the first few people, I would say, teaching texts such as Nur Rida and Quduri in English, and back in November 2005, where it was like gold dust finding those lessons. So people in West London really need to take benefit of Dr. Rizwan. We've benefited a lot over the years, and we're still continuing to benefit. So we're very, very honored that he's joining us this evening, and hopefully we would like to see more of him taking a more important central stage and sharing his thoughts with us. A brief synopsis of the lecture. We've tried to keep it generic, but obviously allow leeway for discussions and questions, etc., as well at the end. In terms of the brief outline, Dr. Rizwan mentioned that he wanted to talk about this, and it really immediately struck a chord with me, because now lots of articles, videos, social media postings being circulated about COVID-19, and to be honest, the average person is bewildered by this information overload that they're being bombarded with. And obviously people are concerned about what's going on. They've got family members who are vulnerable. They themselves might be suffering. The prospect of dying for some people is quite troubling, for most people. So with the circulation of these different theories and ideas and alternative understandings, the average person who doesn't have a background in science, doesn't have a background in extensive reading, is kind of left wondering what is going on. And just anecdotally speaking, speaking to family members, they've seen on WhatsApp statuses and social media postings people getting into fierce arguments about COVID-19 and back and forth. So Dr. Rizwan just wanted to share some thoughts where he kind of mentioned a couple of points, which I'm just going to mention now. Dr. Rashid Buttar from America seems to be a prominent exponent of certain views. So he's just going to have a look at some of his views and just have a discussion about them. So for example, causation by 5G, the discussion regarding the origin of the virus in a Chinese laboratory. And then just at the end, kind of intermixed with all of it, is the danger of using anecdotal evidence and the importance of clinical trials and scientific method. So he's going to expand on that. So inshallah, I'm just going to pass over to him now to share his thoughts with us. And then hopefully via the chat, public chat, at the end we can have some question and answers as well.
Brother Saleh, sorry to interrupt you for a second. We're just getting some messages on our WhatsApp group that people can't log on. You haven't locked it or anything by any chance, have you?
No, it's not locked. They just need to, I'm afraid, I'm not sure what the reason is.
Log on. We'll tell them to persevere. Try again. It's not locked or anything.
Try Google Chrome, please.
Try in Google Chrome.
Yeah, it's on the page that Google Chrome works
When
best.
you log on, go through Google Chrome if you can.
Okay, Bismillah.
Sorry, just finish, inshallah.
Yeah, so that was it. I mean, that was my thoughts. So inshallah, just over to you now, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. So, sorry, at the end you're saying, so we'll have question and answers, inshallah, and I'll leave that to you to moderate if any questions come. And you can also interrupt me, I don't mind, if you want to do it during the lecture.
Okay.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Wa ba'd, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you. Really happy to see all the people that have joined, and I understand there are some brothers and sisters that are trying to join but struggling to log on, but maybe they'll sort of trickle in, inshallah. But I can see there's quite a few of you there that I can recognize some of the names as well. So it's good to have you, inshallah. As Sheikh Saleh said, I want to talk a bit about the coronavirus pandemic, inshallah. And then, yeah, please do have questions. You can type in your questions, or I guess, yeah, probably best to type in your questions into the area, and we can take questions, have discussion. Happy to have that. I don't think the talk will be too long, inshallah. We'll try to keep it fairly short and have time for questions as well. Just before I start, I wanted to say also, look, there are people, better people than me, that have talked about this pandemic, and our elders, you know, in our community, like Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Imam Zaid Shakir. Those are scholars who are more senior to me and are my teachers, and they've put out some videos about the coronavirus pandemic. So I would really refer people to go and listen to those very insightful, very insightful talks about the whole pandemic and what's going on right now. The reason why I thought maybe I should say something is because obviously I do have a medical background. When the lockdown and the pandemic and everything started, similar to most of you, I'm sure I was, receiving messages about various different people saying all these things about 5G, etc., etc. And obviously, being from that medical background, I sort of, and also having the Islamic background, I sort of felt obliged to look into this issue a bit more deeply. So I did spend time start reading up. Obviously, I'm not a virologist, but I have the medical, so I had to refresh myself, read articles, read quite a lot of articles from medical journals about pandemics and epidemics in general, and also coronaviruses in specific. So I did do that reading, and then I was also receiving, some of these different things. Before, just as a sort of introductory note, I think it's worth saying that we have a very specific lens or worldview, you could call it, through which we analyze things that happen in the world. And there's just two points I'd like to draw attention to when we're looking at the whole, coronavirus epidemic, pandemic, everything that's happening, this very unprecedented situation of lockdown, which has affected many countries, and literally billions of people simultaneously around the world are locked up in their houses in this sort of manifestation of totalitarian control that we've never seen in Western countries before, really. and has brought to our really brought to the forefront how we live in a police state. You know, the sort of type of control that is there upon the population is pretty scary in itself. But not looking at the rights and wrongs of it, but just the fact that we live under such a high degree of control of our lives. So when we look at the situation, there's two, I'd say, principles, Islamic principles that I'm going to bring to the table, which are inform the lens through which I look at the situation and analyze the situation. The first is an ayah from the Quran, Surah Al-Hujurat, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. If an unrighteous person comes to you with some news, make sure you verify that news very carefully. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. If an unrighteous person, a fasiq, brings you news, make sure you verify it for yourself, so you don't accept that news just because this person is giving you that news. That's the first principle. And I'm sure everyone would agree that BBC, CNN, Boris Johnson, all of these people completely fulfill the definition of fasiq. So therefore, if we're given news from these sources, it's a Quranic imperative that we have to verify for ourselves before we believe anything that we're told by these people. If you don't think that these sources fulfill the criteria of fasiq, that's a different matter. I don't think we can divert into that area right now, but I think most people know what I'm talking about. So that's the first principle. The second principle, when we're analyzing the situation today, is that, as many scholars have said, we are living in the Dajjalic time. We are living in the Dajjal era, the era of Dajjal. I have recently done a class on that, which is available online. If people are interested, they can go to civilizations.org.uk and they can see my talk on that. But I'm sure you've come across Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Sheikh Imran Hussein, and others. So there's quite convincing evidence that we are in the era of Dajjal. The individual has not appeared, but the signs are there, such as air travel, unprecedented in human history, air travel, which began in the 20th century and is very clearly described by the Prophet ﷺ as the mode of transport that will be used by Dajjal. So things like that, you know. So if we understand these principles, that we're living in a Dajjalic time, in other words, what is Dajjal? Dajjal is the deceiver. He's a deceiver. He will show you Jannah, what you think is Jannah, but really it will be fire. And he will show you fire, but really it will be Jannah. His name himself, Masih ad-Dajjal, he's an imposter Messiah. So he pretends to be something that he's not. So bearing those things in mind, we can look at the situation that we're confronted with. Now, so there's many sources of news. What's in the Quran? Naba. إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِالنَّبَأِ. Naba is news. So there's many sources of news out there today. Apart from the official channels that we mentioned, there are now alternative news channels which can be accessed via the internet. And there are then also, obviously, what I'd probably call rumors that are circulated around social media by individuals. Often the identity of them is unknown. Many of them were sent to me through social media. So, you know, they were talking about things like 5G. Some of them was saying really far out stuff. There was a Muslim guy, I remember, he was going on about how people are going into hospitals and they're being given injections and they're dying, dropping dead like flies. And he was saying, I swear this is true and everything. He was a Muslim, and saying, I know people in Birmingham hospital, and the people are going in there and they're injecting them and they're dying. So there was all sorts of stuff going around. They sometimes can sound quite credible. Some of them you have suspicion straight away because they seem more concerned about you subscribing to their channel and liking them and sharing things, and they keep going on about that. Then you think, what's their agenda really? Are they just trying to get followers or something like that? But then I was sent this Dr. Buttar, and he seemed on the face of it much more credible than a lot of the other stuff that was going around. He seemed to have the credentials, the medical background. It was interesting because when I looked on his when I searched him up, if you look at his Wikipedia, I don't know if it's changed now, but there was quite a negative article about him on the Wikipedia. And the interesting thing was that had been modified just a few days before. So I don't know who had modified it and put quite negative things about him. So there's, obviously there's all of that going on. But he seemed to know what he was talking about. So, and then a brother that I've known for many years, he studied with me for 15 years back as well. He's a very knowledgeable brother. He was sort of texting me saying, look, please give us your opinion about this guy, what he's saying. So that's why I thought I'd do this short talk, just to, because obviously he's a medical background. Most of you are not medical doctors, and there is a jargon, barrier of jargon that is there, with medical profession, which doesn't allow the layperson to have much access to that, to those medical journals and things like that, because the jargon is overwhelming, really. A lot of it is unnecessary, but it exists in Western universities. It exists in every discipline. Every discipline has its own jargon, it's sort of technical jargon. And it basically means that people who are not part of that sort of small group can't really have access to the technical stuff. And the medical is to the extreme. I remember in medical school it took they literally takes years, 2-3 years just to get familiarize yourself with all the technical language of the discipline. So for that reason, I felt sort of almost obliged to have a look at what he was saying and analyze that and bring that back for you guys. To most of you are people that have either studied with me or know me in some way or another. So when we look at a lot of these claims that are out there, and I want to avoid, I was speaking to Sheikh Saleh the other day, I'm actually avoiding the term conspiracy theories, because I think the term conspiracy theories has also now been sabotaged and is used as a weapon against anyone who says something that goes against the mainstream. So anyone who comes up with anything that challenges the official line, let's say the government or the establishment line, it's very convenient to just label them conspiracy theorists, and then we all have a snigger about it. Ha ha ha! It's another conspiracy theory, and you then push it away. So this is a very powerful method of labeling, so that's wrong as well. We have to look at what they're saying, what their arguments are, and look at their evidence. So beware of that. And I've seen actually Muslims become quite polarized myself. There's those Muslims that are sort of yes, we're with the conspiracy theories, and then there's those Muslims that are sort of anti-conspiracy theory, and they're sort of clashing as well, which is a bit silly, because you're just getting entrenched into different camps for no reason. So let's forget about the term conspiracy theory because it's not useful, and it's, as I say, it's being used now as a weapon by the sort of mainstream or the establishment opinion to label and then just bracket away people. So let's just say there are alternative explanations or alternative points of view. So let's look at them for their merits. Let's look at the evidence that they bring, and let's use the methodology that we've been taught by our scholars, people like Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, you know, the analytic thinkers that we have. Let's use our rational faculties and use logic in the widest sense. I mean, you know, not in a narrow sort of Aristotelian sense, but let's use logic and reason to analyze what we're being told by these different sources, you know, and come to rational conclusions. So when we look at Dr. Rashid Buttar, I'll be honest with you, I've only watched one of his videos, yeah, an interview by one of these alternative news medias. I know he's got lots of stuff out there. I honestly don't have time and don't have the inclination to watch a lot of this stuff. And that's something I also wanted to mention, you know, don't get obsessed with these sort of alternative explanations and things that are out there. Life is too short, you know, we're here to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. Anyway, I'll come back to that issue later. But what I would say is right now, and I have also benefited from another Muslim doctor who was also had a look at Dr. Buttar's arguments. So I should give a bit of credit to this brother, Dr. I'm just going to remind myself his name, Dr. Ali Mustafa. He's actually a medical doctor and a Muslim who's done a really good, careful analysis of Dr. Buttar's arguments. He wrote a short article which helped me because it helped me doing a lot of the digging and the research. So I should give credit to him. But if you look at Dr. Buttar, I think the basic three arguments he's coming with, which I want to comment on, is first of all, he talks about how the coronavirus, that there were experiments going on the coronavirus in America, in labs in America in 2014, 2015. And these experiments were what were called gain of function experimentation on viruses. So what they were doing, they were taking coronaviruses and they were essentially genetically modifying them to make them more dangerous and to make them more dangerous to human beings. And this was what one of his claims, that this was being done in America. In 2014, the US government actually banned these experiments on coronaviruses and other viruses, what were known as gain of function experiments. And what he claimed was that then these experiments were moved to China, to Wuhan province, but the funding was still going from the US federal organizations. And in particular, Dr. Fauci was involved. Dr. Fauci, you've probably seen him on the news. He's one of the main experts that is leading the war against coronavirus in America. So this was a very interesting claim. Dr. Buttar actually said that this research was published in Nature journal. For those of you who are not familiar, the Nature journal is one of the leading academic journals in the biological sciences. So if this, when I first listened to that video, from all of the things he was talking about, this was the thing that I said to myself, if one thing we can check up the facts, we can look up, is there such an article? Was there such research being taken place? Can we find evidence for that? That would be a very interesting thing to find out. And then the second thing he generally talks about is the effect of 5G mobile technology that's being rolled out at the moment worldwide, and how that may or may not affect the pandemic. We'll come to that later. And the third major thing he talks about is vaccinations, and in specific, the effect of vaccinations that with the link to autism. I'll also come back to that, but those are the three main things that we'll briefly talk about, inshallah. The first one, as I mentioned, is the sorry, I was just looking at the time. I don't want to go too much over the time. I'm going to aim to finish, inshallah, by 8 o'clock at the latest, so we can have time for question and answers. The first area, as I said, which immediately struck me that we can verify, is where he claimed that these American labs, funded by the National Institute of Health, they were carrying out experiments on the coronavirus. I mean, there are labs all around the world that are experimenting on viruses. We know that anyway. That's not a hidden fact. But what was scary about this was they were carrying out genetic experiments to actually make the virus more deadly. And the fact that this actually then moved to Wuhan province when it was banned in the US is obviously, quite significant, as we know that the pandemic started in the Wuhan province. So, when I was preparing for this talk today, I was actually pretty shocked when I started researching, because I was actually not expecting to find much evidence, clear evidence to back up what Dr. Buttar had been saying. And I was actually expecting to come to this talk today and say to you guys, look, he's making interesting claims, but there's no concrete evidence to back up a lot of what he's saying. So it may be true, it may not be true. But the funny thing was that actually I found there is a lot of very, very direct and what you would call high quality evidence. So it's not, it's in respectable sources. So I have Dr. Sheikh Saleh has kindly uploaded the links to all of these articles, so people can look at it at your leisure. But I just want to share some of them now with you, just sort of in a brief manner. But you can take your time and look at them yourself. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment. Sheikh Saleh, please let me know if this is not working properly. You should now be seeing my OneNote, where I've saved these articles. This is the first one. This is the, as you can see in the corner, this is published in Nature magazine, Nature Medicine. And this is a study back from 2015 or 2014, which basically shows exactly what he was saying, that these researchers in the US, they were carrying out genetic tests on coronavirus. And I won't go into the technical details, but basically what they did, they took, just to give you a bit of background about the coronavirus itself, the coronavirus has been around has been known to scientists and biologists for several decades. And the coronavirus is basically what causes a common cold. And it's been around, as I say, since at least the 1940s, 1950s, scientists have known about coronavirus. It was generally a virus that caused a mild cold or a cold, not a dangerous virus at all. But in 2002, suddenly we had this new coronavirus, a mutation of the coronaviruses that had been around for many decades. And this new coronavirus, which they called the SARS coronavirus, was much more dangerous than the previous coronaviruses that had been around. And this new coronavirus caused respiratory illness. It went down. It was because the common cold is what we, in medical terms, we call an upper respiratory tract. It affects the upper airways, the nose, the throat, but it doesn't go deep into the lungs. But this new coronavirus actually was, in a significant proportion of patients, it was actually going down into the lungs and causing a lung infection, which is called a pneumonia. So it was called SARS, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus. So in a significant proportion of patients, it would get into the lungs and cause severe breathing problems, and a lot of people are dying. So this came out in 2002 for the first time. Some of you who are more approaching my age will probably remember there were a lot of media hype that this could become a pandemic, etc., etc. But it actually died out very quickly, and there were only a couple of hundred people died around the world, and it died away. So it was a false alarm. And then another strain came out in the Middle East, which was called MERS. But anyway, so then in 2020, we had this another a SARS coronavirus comes out. So initially, when this current coronavirus came, it was called SARS coronavirus 2, right? Because it was very similar to the first SARS coronavirus in 2002. But for some reason, the World Health Organization decided to rename it from SARS coronavirus 2 to COVID-19. So it came out at the end of 2019, which is why it's called 19. When they changed the name, I did find it a bit strange. Why are they changing the name? Because names are, as I say, names are very important. So they changed it from, if you look amongst biologists and medical researchers, it's still called SARS coronavirus 2 or SARS-CoV-2 for short. But suddenly the media and everyone decided, we're going to call it COVID-19. An interesting transition. And I did think at the time, why don't they want to, why are they sort of hiding this connection to SARS coronavirus 1, right? Anyway, I didn't think much more of it after that. I thought, well, maybe it's just, it's just me being a little bit paranoid or something. Anyway, going back to what we were talking about, you can see here it's probably, is it quite small on your screen, this clip from my, you probably can't read it, can you, Sheikh Saleh?
I think users can, if they want to, make it large screen by clicking on the 4 arrows next to your screen. So individually, people, if they want to, they can make it bigger by clicking on the 4 arrows. But yeah, it's up to people. But yeah.
Yeah, you can do that, inshallah. Or as I say, you can easily download it later from the links that are on the web page, Sheikh Saleh's website, that you've logged into. Anyway, so basically this article confirms that these guys were taking coronavirus, a normal coronavirus, SARS coronavirus, the first one. And what they did was they combined it with some genetic material from another coronavirus that was found in bats, right? So they were basically genetically combining two different strains of coronavirus, and specifically they were trying to do what's called gain of function. They were trying to see if they can create something that will infect humans. Yes, this was their specific aim of their experiment. They wanted to see if they could modify it so that it would actually infect human beings. Bizarre, you might think. Why, how the hell could they justify such a thing? But this is a fact, and this is, in fact, this is not unusual. This is happening with other viruses. This is science, you know. For people who are in the scientific field, you know what I mean. Scientists do these type of experiments simply for it's just justified by being just science, you know. And the specific justification they give here is that we want to understand better how coronaviruses can mutate to infect humans, so that we can be able to, if it does happen in the future in nature, we'll be able to fight against it better, if you see what I mean. So they have their justification, you know, for doing these sort of experiments. So basically they succeeded, you know. That's what the paper says, that they did this, what they call they created this chimeric virus. The chimeric virus means you've taken two different coronaviruses, genetic material, combined them together, and they created a virus which they then tested on human lung cells. Human lung cells. Obviously, they can't test it on humans, right? This is not the 1950s when they were actually testing things on like Afro-Caribbean people in America and so on. Nowadays, you can't do that in America. So they were taking human lung cells, you know, tissue culture, and they found that this virus could penetrate the human lung cells and cause damage. So they were really excited. Yes, we managed to create this virus that can infect humans. And then because they can't test it on actual living humans, they injected mice. And they found that these mice lost weight rapidly and died within 4 to 5 days. Much more quickly and much more deadly than the actual original SARS coronavirus that they were experimenting upon. In other words, the mutation that they caused was far more deadly to the mice. And that got them very excited, and they got it published in Nature, which is one of the top academic journals in the world, as I said. Just as a side point, I wanted to say, I don't know if any of you found it disturbing that the fact that they were injecting it into mice and the mice all died. I found, you know, because as I say, I've been reading quite a few of these medical articles now on the experiments that they're doing on not just coronaviruses, but on many other viruses and other infections. And the way they use animals, you know, it's horrible. And they just talk about it as if these animals have no feelings, if these animals have no sort of life, right? They have no rights. So they talk about mice and rats and chimpanzees. Oh, we injected them with these viruses and they got severe meningitis and they dropped dead. And it's very sort of matter of fact, right? But I just wanted to pause for a moment and think, wait a minute, you know, what's going on with these animals? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ completely forbade any type of cruelty to animals, even to ants, right? Even to ants. He didn't allow people to kill ants, to burn them, to small insects. Even small insects should not be harmed. So what has given human beings the right to torture and kill animals for the sake of so-called scientific progress, right? I think it's my personal opinion is completely against Islam. I once gave a lecture to some medical students in London, and I mentioned this, you know, and they were pretty sort of they were a little bit hostile, because they were saying, oh no, we have to do medical research. How are we going to advance how are we going to find new medicines and all this sort of stuff? But who gave us the right? Who gave you that right to torture animals? To torture and kill animals? You know? So, you know, after reading all of these papers, I was actually feeling a bit sick. The way they were describing, they just described the effects on animals, you know, chimpanzees, rats, and I just thought, you know, maybe this is the comeback, you know, maybe this is Allah's punishing us for doing this to the animals. Who knows? Allah alim, Allah knows best. Anyway, going back to the things we were talking about. So this was quite interesting that, you know, what Dr. Buttar was saying was completely true, that they were doing these experiments. And then I also found, I mean, this is an article here, which you can read at your own leisure. This is actually, I'm not going to go into this one. This is just a general article about what they call bioterrorism, just to show that there's a whole massive literature about this out there, you know, how viruses and other microorganisms can be used in biological weapons. Going on to the next article, this is the article I'm talking about bioterrorism. So bioterrorism is the idea that, you know, terrorists could get hold of potentially deadly viruses, right? Or not just viruses, but obviously there's bacteria as well that can be deadly. And if these terrorists get hold of these, they could then release them and cause a lot of damage. So luckily for us, it's only the American government and the Russian governments that have got these deadly viruses in their labs, because they're the good guys, you know, they're not going to do anything bad. But if they get into the hands of wrong people, bad people, they could do bioterrorism, right? Lucky they were the good guys, Sheikh Saleh. So this is so this is sort of general reading here. He talks about coronavirus in there. He talks about smallpox. Actually, smallpox is the most deadly agent that people are worried about getting into the wrong hands. I'm gonna, if we get time, just talk a little bit about smallpox in a minute, inshallah. So the next article we have here, you can see this is confirmation that what Dr. Buttar was saying was correct about that the US government actually banned this research in 2014, right? And why do you think they banned it? Why do you think they banned this research? You know, it's worth thinking about that for a minute. The reason was because they became quite concerned that these super deadly viruses that we're creating in our labs, yeah, that are deadly to humans, what would happen if by accident they escaped from the lab, or you know, they got into the wrong hands, or they were intentionally leaked out into the population. And so that's why the government actually banned the research. And interestingly, in 2017, they've now reversed the ban. So in 2017, the experiments were allowed to happen again. No explanation is given why the ban was reversed by the federal government. But anyway, this article here in the Asia Times, which is very well referenced, you know, you can read through it. I've highlighted in this some of the key points. You can see that the US government placed the ban on this type of research, and they talk about weaponizing viruses, etc. However, once it was banned in America, it was outsourced to China, specifically to the Wuhan lab. This is the leading lab which does virus research in China, in Wuhan. And you can see here that Dr. Fauci was part of the Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And these people were now funding the same research to continue in the Wuhan lab with funding from America. This is an article from the Daily Mail, once again confirming the same story. Now, the interesting thing in this article, which is very, very significant, is that the Mail on Sunday, as you can see here highlighted in the second paragraph, the Mail on Sunday has got documents which show that the Wuhan lab that was doing these experiments, they were using coronavirus, which they had gathered from bats, from certain caves in Yunnan, right? From certain caves in Yunnan, 1,000 miles away from Wuhan itself. Now, what they say in this article, and this is on the Daily Mail, please check it out for yourself. Sequencing of the COVID-19 genome has traced it to bats found in those very same caves. In other words, what scientists have done, they've looked at the COVID-19 genetic sequence, and they're able to confirm that this particular coronavirus has come from the exact same caves that these Wuhan researchers had got their coronaviruses from. Okay? That is very, very significant in my opinion. All of this, of course, some of you are thinking could be just a wild coincidence. The US government at the moment, you may be aware, has actually launched an investigation to try and find out if the virus could have come from this lab in China. So the whole issue has become massively politicized at this moment. The reason behind it is pretty obvious. Donald Trump is coming up to an election. He's very scared because obviously the death toll in America has been the biggest in the world. He's very scared that he's going to get all the blame, you know, so he's going to lose the election. So there's been a very clear attempt by Donald Trump and his associates to draw attention and put blame onto China. So he's been calling it the Chinese virus. And so it's in their interest now to make these claims that the virus was sort of came out of China from this laboratory. However, obviously the fact that US funding was there is an embarrassment. So it's become so the Chinese are retaliating by putting out this news. Actually, yes, we were doing these experiments, but there was funding coming from the US. So the things become very, very messy. It's become a real geopolitical, politicized issue. So we also have to bear that in mind. But if we just stick to the facts here, you can see the articles that I'm posting and showing you. Most of these are from before the pandemics, you know. So they're not part of this whole sort of politicized geopolitical clash that's taking place right now. So we go to the next article here. You can see once again just confirming. This is actually taken from where's this taken from? Nationalfile.com. Another source, not so well known, to be honest. And then we've got this one. This article is from Fox News, right? Once again, so you can see, I mean, this is known to the mainstream media. You can see Fox News have an article here talking about how the US is funding research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And they're basically saying, you know, we shouldn't be giving money to these guys. They've been experimenting on coronavirus, and they've probably released this coronavirus and caused this massive pandemic. Next article here is not related to the topic we're talking about, but is related to the 5G issue. Next article here is just showing that in 2017, they've started in America, the ban was actually reversed. So the US government has lifted the ban on this type of gain of function research, and they've actually started doing it again, bizarrely. So it makes you think, why would they stop it in the first place? There must have been reasons, and why have they started it again, you know? And this is another unrelated. So that is basically what I wanted to show you in terms of the articles to do with the Chinese laboratory issue. So I was, to be honest, I was quite shocked. I was not expecting to find all of this information out there. It does seem like the mainstream media are obviously aware of this. And as I say, it's become a massive geopolitical issue with the Trump administration are actually, you know, using this to try to deflect criticism from their handling of the coronavirus by blaming it on the Chinese and so on. So it's quite interesting how this is going to pan out. But it's quite surprising how it doesn't seem to be, you know, the mainstream media are not giving it the sort of significance that you or I may feel, that actually, you know, this pandemic may have originated from a laboratory where they've been doing these experiments funded by America and done by the Chinese. The other thing I wanted to mention was, you know, this is by no means unique to coronavirus. They are carrying out experiments on all different viruses, influenza viruses. As I said, smallpox is actually there's a lot of literature out there on obviously biological weapons. Where, you know, we're well known that America, Russia, and pretty much all countries, you know, that have that sort of advanced technology are obviously going to be developing biological weapons. And the smallpox is an interesting one. If you have time to read this article here that is posted up, I think it's this one here. If you have time, have a read of that by this guy, Impact of Synthetic Genomics on the Threat of Bioterrorism with Viral Agents. He says, you know, the smallpox virus is actually the main one that they worry about getting into the hand of terrorists. Now, smallpox, for those of you who are not aware, it was a particularly deadly disease in the late Middle Ages and early modern times, and it was actually eradicated by development of a vaccine. And in 1977, the World Health Organization were actually able to announce that it has now been eradicated worldwide. So it's actually dead. There's no more smallpox left anywhere in the world, in nature. However, the smallpox virus, there are samples of it in very high security labs. One batch is kept in America and one batch is kept in Russia. And these are the only official stocks of the smallpox virus that are in the world today. Now, the scary thing is because in 1977, smallpox was eradicated, everyone born since 1977, none of us have got immunity to smallpox. Yeah, none of us have had the vaccination. And well, I say us, I was born in 1972, but I'd include myself in that group as well. And even those people that are older and may have had immunity, because it was such a long time ago, their immunity is no longer going to be sufficient. So if smallpox ever was released again, it could cause particularly deadly pandemic, much, much worse than what we've seen with the COVID-19. The COVID-19 has overall been fairly mild in terms of compared to previous pandemics, like obviously the plague and the smallpox. And even if you compare it to HIV/AIDS, which has caused millions of deaths since it came out a few decades back. But it's by no means over, so we can't speak too soon as well. So we don't know what's going to happen with the COVID-19 at the moment. So as I said, luckily for us, Sheikh Saleh, the only known smallpox is with the Americans and the Russians. And obviously they're never going to do anything. They're not terrorists or anything like that. So we've got nothing to worry about. They're in safe hands. Sheikh Saleh, you don't look convinced.
Good to know, alhamdulillah.
Around with you there. As long as the good guys have the stuff, the deadly stuff, we're safe. I'm sure they would have a dream of releasing it upon the populations of the world.
So inshallah, Dr. Rizwan, I think we'll get drawing close to 8 o'clock, but if you possible to mention about the 5G, if possible, inshallah, then we go to question and answers.
Yeah, that's great. I can do that. Now, with the 5G, there's a lot of stuff, obviously, about 5G out there. I think if you look at what Dr. Buttar says himself, because a lot of people are getting confused, because people just see headlines. Unfortunately, most of us have become we're not these serious people anymore. I'm sorry to say that. We don't look at things in a proper way. We're just reading, WhatsApp messages, tweets. We're not bothering to really look at things properly. So people are just getting confused, and people are saying, I think, oh, 5G is causing coronavirus and all that. But even Dr. Buttar himself says, look, no one's saying that 5G causes COVID-19, right? The only thing that it may possibly be doing is that this sort of electromagnetic radiation that comes from the 5G may be weakening the immune system, or maybe having some effects on the hemoglobin, which is the element that carries oxygen around the blood. So there are some research done on the effects of radiation upon the ability of red blood cells to carry oxygen. And there are some studies, I've seen them myself, but the evidence is not completely verified at the moment. In fact, one study I saw, it actually enhanced the oxygen carrying capacity of the red blood cells. So it's research that's still in progress. I'd say generally speaking, there is a lot of research on the effects of what's called electromagnetic radiation on living cells, on living organisms. And even before 5G, with 4G, 3G, there's been research going on. Now, it's not in certain people's interest to fund that type of research. So, but there are people, that have been and publishing results on that. So I'm sure people know, that these sort of electromagnetic rays can be harmful to human beings and to living organisms. But in terms of a direct correlation with COVID-19, actually, I think, to be fair, I shouldn't say anything either way because I haven't looked into it in depth. So I think that's all I'd really say about the 5G issue. Unless you want me to say anything specific, Sheikh Saleh.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I think what we'll do now, if it's okay with you, just go to some question and answers. I'll just start off, and then what we'll do is we'll look at the chat messages, and you can kind of take it from there.
Before we go, because I just one last item, and I just spent 2 minutes, just 1 minute on
Sure,
it.
yeah. Of course, yeah, of course.
It's quite interesting. The last thing was what Dr. Buttar talks about a lot about is vaccinations and autism specifically. And once again, thanks to Dr. Ali, who's researched a bit into that as well. And he's verified that the figures are correct that Dr. Buttar is quoting, that the rise in autism in the last couple of decades is very rapid. And to be honest, I mean, this is something that psychiatrists deal with, and I've noticed it myself. You know, in the last 20 years that I've been practicing, there is an increasing numbers of people being born with autism spectrum disorder. Very, very dramatic increases, you know, and it seems that, and these are World Health Organization figures. These are not just sort of some, you know, some unreliable source, etc. So I think at the moment they're saying 1 in 32 people are born with autism spectrum, and it's increasing. So in years to come, it's projected to keep increasing. And you know, Dr. Buttar is obviously linking vaccinations to this increase in autism. He talks about how this increase has been going on ever since America rolled out the national vaccination program, which also we have in Britain. You know, we have a national vaccination program where everyone, all babies that are born are given multiple vaccinations, pretty much from birth. You know, in the first few years of their life, it carries on. What I would say is to that, you know, two things. First of all, none of my children were vaccinated. You know, I've got 4 children, mashallah, ranging from age 22 to 12, and mashallah, all very healthy. I didn't give vaccination to any of them. I have my own issues, you know. I have my own suspicions about vaccinations, but I think what most reasonable people would say is probably the link between vaccinations and autism has not been definitively proved. Yeah, it's not been definitively proved, but at the same time, it may well be true, you know. But who's going to fund the research? Because in medicine, to prove something causes something, you have to have very, very robust and very, very expensive studies, you know, on large populations of people before you can prove something to the level of medical evidence. Medical research is of a very high level of threshold for evidence that is required. So who's going to fund that research? You see what I mean? There was a doctor in the UK, I remember, it was given a lot of media about 10, 15 years ago. He basically published a study saying that vaccinations cause autism, you know, and a lot of people stopped vaccinating their children in Britain following those studies. And then there was a massive backlash against him from the, let's say, the establishment, yeah, right? To the point where eventually he was actually struck off. He was struck off the GMC, the General Medical Council. And there was massive, you know, media against him. So it's an interesting area, you know. There are some people making a lot of money Because if you think about it, once you have a national program, you know, who are the people that are manufacturing these vaccines for the governments to roll out these national programs? So there's big money, you know, big pharmaceuticals make big money. It's a messy field. That's all I would say for now on that issue. Inshallah, we can take some questions. Jazakumullah khairan.
Okay, Jazakallah khairan, thanks. Thank you for your thoughts. I just, before we go to the question, there's a few there, and there's some like comments as well. But my yeah, when you talked about like for correlation is not necessarily causation in the medical field. But do you think in the reason why that's the case is to be robust in terms of making claims? So, for example, when I was a kid, we went to Pakistan, and I remember very distinctly, there was a man who was claiming that he had the cure for asthma. And what probably happened, I think, was that he made some compound, gave it to someone, and it was by anecdotally just so happened that person was cured by chance. They would have been cured anyway, or it was a placebo effect, etc. And obviously we took it. It was absolutely, disgusting to eat, but it had no impact. And one thing that struck me was that it's just that mindset that, oh well, it worked here with one person, therefore it must be true, therefore it does work, and anybody who kind of questions it. So I mean, that's like that in certain societies you have this like tajriba, like it worked once or twice, therefore it must be true. Whereas the Western model is you need to prove it. Like correlation is not causation. Like for example, autism, it might not have been vaccination. It could have been TVs. More TVs have. You could plot a graph showing TVs have also increased, or microwave ovens have also increased, or it could be something else. Mobile phones have increased, linked to. So it might be something else totally that might be causing. But don't you think that's a positive aspect of Western scientific research, that before making claims you need to really thoroughly prove it? And that seems to be lacking in our community, because that feeds into this, people getting really strongly taken in by some of these arguments and really fiercely defending them. Because in the Sharia as well, the burden of proof, isn't it, on the claimant? So would that have an impact here? So just some thoughts there. You could comment, please.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Jazakumullah khairan. I totally agree. I mean, this is one of the benefits actually I found of having the medical background, is that they teach us to look at things very, very critically. It's called critical appraisal. So any so-called claims out there where people have done studies and they make claims, we do, as doctors, we do get trained to look at that very, very critically. And as you say, to establish causation is actually very, very difficult. I'll give you an example. I mean, smoking and lung cancer. It took a long time before that was actually established, that doctors could say for fact that smoking does cause lung cancer. And you can only do that when you've ruled out all of these, like you said, confounding variables. So as you say, there are many other aspects that could possibly be causing the rise in autism. And I totally agree with that. It could be environmental factors, it could be pollution. It could be things that we're eating, things in our food, drinks, Allah alim. So yeah, that's why I said I would say it's not conclusively proven from vaccinations. But as well, to be honest, I haven't looked at it in detail, but this is my understanding. People may have done more research than I have in that field. I definitely haven't, gone out of my way to spend lots of time looking at all of the evidence and critically appraising it. It's not my field. Well, it's not something I want to get into. Just to let you know, I mean, I had a phone call from a brother from Qatar before the lecture. He wanted to speak to me before this talk today, and you may be logged on now. I'm not sure, but you know, this brother was telling me, oh, have you heard of there's Dr. Buttar, but there's this doctor, that doctor, this research, that research, you know. So I think some Muslims, as you say, are very sort of going really into this sort of things that I don't like to call conspiracy theories, but let's say alternative theories that are out there, and spending a lot of time doing that. And you know, I would say we shouldn't be getting too obsessed as well with alternative theories, with even with end of time things like Dajjal, Yajuj and Majuj, even though I myself do teach those subjects. But I don't, you know, people who know me like yourself and other brothers and sisters that know me, they know that I don't spend my whole time teaching about Dajjal and Yajuj and Majuj. And even if they come and see me, you know, in my personal time, I don't go on talking about that all the time. In fact, hardly ever, you know. And I think that's where I think I prefer Sheikh Hamza's approach, because he also does teach these things. But if you see, most of the time, he doesn't spend most of his time talking about these things, but actually getting on with your, because a lot of those stuff is conjectural at the end of the day. They are, you know, they are, we can't be sure, you know. Dajjal may not come for another 1,000 years. That's the reality of it, you know. So let's spend time on things that we know for sure, like each of us are going to die. What ibadat have we done? What have we prepared for our graves? What have we prepared for the akhirah? Before we spend hours and hours and hours just looking and reading more about all of these alternative things, you know. Yeah, just wanted to put that out there as well.
Jazakallah khairan. What I'm trying to do is try to summarize some questions. So there's one comment there from I want to believe. I'm trying to pick out the question there, but I think you're saying there is this is the question now. What I have issue with is people not taking it seriously, the virus seriously, and going around like it's not real. People are claiming it's a hypoxic ailment. So would you? I think that's the question there in that comment. What would you like to say on that? That some people are denying that it's real, that it's kind of hyped up, etc.
Are you sure that's not my wife put that question?
I'm not sure.
I'm just joking.
Yeah.
No, it's because she gets annoyed about it. You know, it's true. You know, it's totally true. I mean, I mean, to be honest, I don't speak to that many people, but the people I have spoken to over the last few weeks, I was quite surprised at the the number of people who just think this is all some sort of, it's not even true, you know. It's all some sort of government plot to do things, you know, that the coronavirus is basically all just being made up. It's quite so, yeah. A lot of Muslims do. You know, one of my good friends the other day, you know, he said to me, "Oh, you know, people are just they're going in the hospital. Old people are going in hospital, but they're all being killed. You know, they're being killed. They don't come out." And other people have said, you know, because you know, I had the infection myself a few weeks back.
Okay.
Yeah, so when I told people, some of them were quite so, oh, you really? So it's real then, you know?
But do you think that? But it's like on a slight tangent to that, because they were talking about the mortality rate. You know, for example, they say the flu is 0.1% mortality rate. But then again, with COVID-19, we don't actually know the denominator, so we can't actually work out the mortality rate, because you know I mean, somebody was saying to me today, well, they did 50,000 more cases, but if you don't test and you don't get those extra cases, the mortality rate is the actual per million or per capita, or however you calculate it. So the next question is, all right, that kind of ties into, is the from Mubin Saab, I think, is the death rate of COVID-19 believable? So that kind of ties into that. What is the actual death rate? You know, because we don't know the denominator really.
I think it's a good question. Because as we said, remember our first principle, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَأٍ. So where are we getting the death rates from? They're from BBC, they're from the Office of National Statistics and so on. I think, I think they probably are true. I mean, it's very difficult for people to make up, because the way these organizations work, let's say the Office of National Statistics, which publishes death rates and causes of death, the people working within these systems, they're just bureaucrats, they're just officials, they're not all going to be involved in some sort of deception, they're Joe Blogs, people like us who work in these places. However, having said that, bearing in mind that we live in the Dajjalic era, that we live in an area of deception as well, I wouldn't. So one of the ways that we can look at this is, and this is a simple experiment that any Muslim can do, which I think we could easily verify. Is this coronavirus real? Is it causing more deaths? A very easy thing. All we need to do is go to the Muslim undertakers, go to Muslim cemeteries, and just ask them, in the last 2-3 months, have you had a large number of deaths, more than you would have on an average year? And they will be able to tell you straight away, because all deaths are recorded in those cemeteries, and probably even in the masjids that do burials, right? So if for the last 10 years, for the last 10 years, you've had, say, 1,000 deaths per week, and then suddenly you've had 2,000, then we can say with pretty much certainty that the coronavirus has been. And anecdotally, what I've heard from Muslim cemeteries and things like that, there is a big increase, in the last few months in the number of people being buried. So if people want to do that, but we're too lazy, we don't want to actually do any real research. We just want to have quick fix, slogans on mass social media. If we want to actually find out, are the figures true? Can we believe things? We can easily do very simple studies ourselves and find out, But sorry, I just wanted to say as well, those people who are skeptical about what they're hearing from the government and from the BBC, I don't want to sound like they're also crazy, because I think that is correct, and I can very much understand why Muslims in particular, but generally the general population now, in America, for example, people don't believe what's on CNN. That's why people like Donald Trump have come into power. So we have a good reason to be skeptical, and the other thing is, these Western governments, and generally governments around the world, there's no doubt that they are using the pandemic to increase their power of control over the population. They do that, after 9/11, they did that. They brought in new laws to make their control greater, and they've used the pandemic. A really interesting thing happened in Britain, in the UK Parliament, when they passed that new law, the coronavirus bill, or whatever it was called. There was an interview with this lady on Sky News. She was a UN representative, a high up official in the United Nations, a legal expert. And she said it's very surprising that the government has bought a 300-page document, for this coronavirus bill in a matter of a few days. She said, because if you remember back, for example, you remember Brexit. At the time of Brexit, they bought the Brexit bill, which was bought very urgently as well. And it was literally a 1-page document. Because when you bring something very quickly, you don't have time. Legal matters are very intricate. They take a long time to produce these documents. So how did they suddenly produce this nearly 300-page coronavirus bill in such a short period of time? She actually said it seemed like this is something that was already there in the back shelf, ready to be bought out, which is slightly ominous as well if you think about it. So yeah, I think totalitarian governments, it's well known among social scientists, that they have to keep their populations in a state of fear and panic. And
Mm.
Western governments are totalitarian governments, even though their control is more hidden and more subtle. I think it's now become much more out in the open. People have
Okay.
felt it. People have felt, actually, I can't leave my house. There are police out there. But prior to this, it was more subtle. But this is a well-known fact, that you have to keep your population in a state of fear, because when people are scared, then they're looking at the government to protect them. We need the government. We need Boris Johnson to protect us from this deadly virus. It's out there, it's killing us off. So all of those factors do come into this scenario. But once again, just to be clear, I'm not saying that this pandemic was caused by these governments. Until we know that for sure, which we probably will never know, it will always be a conjecture.
Okay, Dr. Rizwan, there's a few questions here, so we're going to try to see if we can do a quick fire, if possible, question round. Apologies if we can't cover all the questions, but a quick question: do you believe ventilators have increased the death rate? That's a question there.
Sorry, just 1 second, sorry. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that question, sorry.
Yeah, so there's a quick question here: do you believe ventilators have increased the death rate?
That's an interesting question. Look, I'm not an expert in ITU or anything like that. To be honest, I did think to myself, because I also know some fairly young people that went into, ventilation and they never came out. In fact, two male nursing staff from where I work, my hospital, actually died during the last few weeks. And they were one of them was fairly healthy. When they went on the ventilator, never came out. I think I did think to myself, I don't know if the staff there are trained to a high level, because they were bringing in a lot of staff, to these ICU who have not got years and years of experience. So I'm not sure if that had something to do with it, to be honest. Once they get onto ventilation, they were not able to get them off without them dying. But Allah Alim, I don't know.
I mean, I'm not an expert, but I was watching an interview of someone who went into hospital, and they were going to, and his doctor, he went to intensive care, and the doctor looking after him actually told the nurses not to put him on the ventilator, and he could hear him. Obviously, he was struggling to breathe, and you could hear him saying that if you put him on the ventilator, his body's going to shut down and stop fighting, because the body works better when it's fighting more. But obviously, I'm not an expert, but that, and he thinks that might have saved him. So that's anecdotal evidence. So the next question, very quickly, is what should the appropriate response from Muslims be? On one end, we have people who are scared to come out their house. So that's a question there about So what kind of approach should Muslims be taking?
Yeah, I mean, don't be scared. Don't be scared, inshallah. We trust in Allah. The Prophet Muhammad the most amazing hadith, where he said, trust in Allah, but tie up your camel. For me, that is just such an amazing, because that whole thing about trusting in Allah and qadar, he just hit it so much on the head, So yeah, tie up your camel. I'm not saying go out there and ignore all the advice that governments are giving. I do believe there is a virus out there. There is a virus out there which is nasty. I got it quite nasty.
Okay.
It's not just a normal flu. I was for a few days I was praying sitting down for the first time in my life. It knocked me back quite a lot. So there's a nasty virus out there. It's going around. I don't think anyone sensible would dispute that. You can catch it from people, obviously. As soon as I got it, my whole family got it the next day. So be careful, take sensible precautions, but don't go to the extreme as well, where we're Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we're people of Jama'ah, we get together. That's a very, very central. I've talked about that in many of my darsil. People who study with me will know, it's a very important part of our deen, of having human interaction and social interaction and getting together. And once again, totalitarian regimes, modern governments, they don't want people getting together. They don't want people associating. because when people get together, they talk, they get ideas in their heads, you know, and they want to keep people isolated and solitary and just in front of a screen, like we have been for the last few weeks. That's what they want, you know.
Another quick question here is,
shall I be sensible? Yeah.
Has the lockdown response been proportional to the mortality rate of the virus? And so just before you answer that, I just want to add in, like, for example, in Pakistan, so the question also talks about mosques being closed, but in Pakistan, I think all of the different denominations came together and said, we're not going to close the mosques. And, you know, there was that battle between the scientists and the ulama and etc. But, you know, as far as I can tell, there hasn't been that huge death rate in Pakistan. Obviously, they caveated it, they advised people who were you know, susceptible to the virus, at-risk groups, to stay at home. But I think also that, but the question talks about, has the lockdown response been proportional to the mortality rate? Because that ties into that Imperial College study, I think, that model, which predicted widespread death. And obviously, there's discussions now about whether that modeling was correct or accurate, and how accurate that modeling was. So do you think the response has been proportional, or is it too early to tell? Because you've got some scientists like Kenneth Osterholm, I think his surname is Osterholm, I think his first name is Kenneth. I think, and his argument is that it's way too early to tell how this virus has gone. It's going to take a couple of years for us to actually work out. So I mean, he compares it, I mean, he gives a baseball analysis that in baseball you have 9 innings in a match, or in like cricket you have 50 overs or 20 overs in a 2020 game. We're only in the 3rd over at the moment. We're only going to find out in, you know, in a year or two what's going on. But I mean, what are your thoughts at the moment about the lockdown, and has it been proportional or not?
Yeah, I think that guy is completely correct. You know, obviously there's more data, more information coming out all the time, and he's totally right. You know, we won't really know until a couple of years. In terms of the response, was it proportionate? I think it was a very difficult decision for masjids to make. I was obviously tracking, you know, some of those discussions that were going on and things like that. The British Association of Medical Experts, or what, BEMA, I think they're called, they made very strong appeals to the masjids to close down. You had the ITU consultant on there. You had a few consultants, you know, making very passionate pleas to the masjids to close down. It was a very, very difficult decision. And I think I wouldn't like to be the one that had to make it, because you have to weigh up a lot of things. I think ultimately, inshallah, as long as they did shura and they respected also the opinion of scholars, inshallah, Allah would put barakah in the decision. You know, we're people of shura. Wa amruhum shura bainahum, Allah said in the Quran. We decide our affairs by consultation, you know. But I was really, really happy when I saw that Pakistani ulama had said, we're not going to close the masjids. And probably Pakistan is different to this country as well. So just because they said that doesn't mean that that was a wrong decision for this country. You know, I think this country, I think the virus may have something to do with colder climates as well, you know. So that may be part of it. But as you say, we're only going to find out in a year or two's time the exact thing. So it was a difficult decision. I think in retrospect, because the masjids closed down about a week before Boris Johnson closed them down, I would have waited till the government closed them down. I think we were, but then, you know, that's just my opinion. I think it's a big decision. It seems more sensible to just say, like, you know, elderly people should avoid coming. Don't do wudu before you come to the masjid. You know, those type of things might have been possible, but yeah. I mean, the decision had to be made, and I think, you know, people made, inshallah, if they did it in the right way through shura, it was the correct decision either way, inshallah.
And there's a question about animal testing. How would medicines then be able to be tested if not on animals before human testing? There's a query there. How would we, you know, feasibly go about testing the safety of possible medication if we ban animal
whoever
testing?
asked the question, why don't we test it on you?
Yeah. So I mean, they're just asking.
Do you feel that you have more rights than animals? Do you know?
But wouldn't it come under the necessity permits unlawful matters? Would that principle not apply in that case?
You know what? This is just my personal opinion. I'll be honest, Sheikh Saleh. I know there are many Muslim countries where there are experimentations going on animals, but this has all been exported from the West. You know, the Western whole scientific ethos and method has become globalized. So if people may have difference of opinion. I personally can't see any justification just to say, we want to develop medicines for human beings, but we'll torture and kill animals. Does that make sense to me? I don't know. Does that make sense to people?
I don't know. I'm just thinking about the Ottomans. They would sacrifice the brothers of the Sultan in order to prevent huge fitna.
No, that's what I'm saying. Experiment on humans by all means. If people want to volunteer for that, by all means do that.
I don't think you get many volunteers. I don't think. And then I think we want to wrap up because
animals have feelings too, Sheikh Saleh.
Indeed.
Animals have feelings too. And you know what? Scientists are finding out day by day. There's so much research coming out now that animals actually have thinking as well. I think we're going to have to revise the whole, the Aqidah issue of, not Aqidah, but, in logic, they say hayawan natiq, that human being is hayawan natiq. I think now we're finding out that actually that's not specifically human beings. Animals are communicating and thinking in almost abstract ways. I'm not going to go into a tangent now, but it's there. Trust me. Yeah. Anyway, carry on.
I think that's the final question, but just one about do you think the vaccination programs are part of a more larger plot of a Dajjalic system? And what your thoughts on somebody expressing those kind of ideas?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's possible. It's possible. That's all I'm going to say. And unless we find out, concrete evidence that something is true, we can't really say it's true. So this is what I don't like about certain people become just, like I think Sheikh Saleh, he was saying as well, people become entrenched on one side or the other. Some people are so convinced this is all a Dajjalic plot and everything. And there's some, so there's some people that are doing this. And then some people are so convinced on the other side. But the truth is, it is possible. It is possible. And also it may not be. So I think we just have to accept that, until you find clear and concrete evidence that something is true. We have to just say it's possible, But as I say, there's a messy picture with pharmaceutical companies making lots of money, which I think is more of an issue, really, probably because these big businesses have massive influence upon governments and ministers, and even research chairs in universities. So they have an agenda. They want to make loads of money. I think that's probably more of a factor as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you very much for your time and for the people joining us this evening. I really appreciate it. I think we're going to draw a close here as we're going for an hour and a half, and Maghrib is kind of approaching soon. So I'd like to just thank you once again, Rizwan, for your time. I hope, inshallah, we've discussed some other ideas as well. So we'll be communicating that to people as well, some projects and courses. Hopefully, inshallah, we hope to host you again very, very soon in the near future, and some other teachers as well.
Before you switch off, Sheikh Saleh, can I just say a little apology to the person? I did not mean to come across a bit abrupt when I said, should they experiment on you? So please forgive me if it came across a bit like that. But
and those who would like to volunteer, we'd pass on doctor's details.